This case takes us to Anchorage, Alaska in the United States of America, back to the summer of 2019. Anchorage is a busy city, home to nearly half of the Alaskan population. There's plenty to do there with gorgeous hiking routes, peaceful countrysides, lots of wildlife and ski resorts. It's the perfect place for as quiet or busier getaway as you could want. Amongst the almost 300,000 people that called this place home, lived the very big and very close Hoffman family, who all lived together in an East Anchorage trailer. On the 2nd of June, Timothy Hoffman had started to grow concerned about his daughter, Cynthia. She had not replied to any messages or answered any calls for several hours. Although she was 19, Cynthia faced developmental and learning challenges, meaning she worked at a 7th grade level. Her being out of contact for even just a short while was alarming, and Timothy knew something was wrong. On the first weekend of June 2019, the Hoffman family spent some time working on a friend's camper van together. On the 2nd of June, Cynthia made plans to meet up with her sister and get her part of the money she had earned. She sent a text message to her father to say that she was on the way, but she never met her sister that afternoon. Her father called the police, but was told he needed to wait 24 hours and then ring them back. Timothy was upset that they weren't taking it as seriously as they should have been, and said that they didn't understand how vulnerable Cynthia actually was. For someone still so young, she was definitely busy and very determined. As tough as school had been for her, Cynthia had persevered and graduated in 2018. As well as working as an apprentice for Timothy, who worked in building and construction, she was earning extra money at a restaurant, studying in a post-high school skills program, and was close to getting her driver's permit as well. Timothy and Cynthia shared an incredibly close bond, and he said she was most definitely a daddy's girl. He recalled that she was always working hard to overcome her challenges and looking to make her family proud of her with everything that she did. All she wanted was my blessing and approval, and I gave that to her a lot, he said. Frustrated with the police department, Timothy started contacting news stations and set off on his motorbike, going through the nearby woods and bike paths, searching everywhere. When she didn't come home the first day, I knew something was wrong, and then all I could think about was the knock on the door, he said. He had many people reaching out to see if they could help, and he gladly accepted them all. But one set of messages in particular left him more confused than grateful. He had received several messages from one of Cynthia's closest friends, Angela. Angela said that Cynthia had asked her to drop her off at Polar Bear Park, something that she had agreed to do, but she hadn't seen her since then. She said she had last seen her at 4 p.m. on the 2nd of June, wearing blue jeans, a hoodie, and tennis shoes. Timothy knew this was strange, as Cynthia didn't mention this to him or her sister that she was going to meet. In Angela's messages she said, "Is she okay? I hope she comes home safely. She's my best friend. I'm starting to get worried. I don't trust what she said about that guy. I love her too. I want the best for her and want her to come back. She won't answer me. I think she's ignoring everyone. I know she will come home safe." Timothy had no idea what guy Angela was talking about, and even though he pushed for clarification, he was none the wiser. The police were now looking into Cynthia's disappearance, and Timothy passed these messages on to them in the hope it might help them find some answers. Little did he know, the number was not linked to an Angela. It was linked to an 18-year-old named Denali Bremer. Denali and Cynthia were actually close friends and had met through school. They often posed in selfies together on social media with the captions reading BFF. So why she had given a different name was confusing. Just one day later, on the evening of June the 3rd, the Anchorage Police Department were contacted by a woman named Nicole. Nicole said that on the evening of the 2nd of June, the date Cynthia was last seen, Nicole's daughter and someone Nicole knew as Anthony were both at her house. Shockingly, Anthony had told her that Cynthia was dead and that he was responsible, and her daughter was none other than Denali Bremer, who also apparently went by Angela. After this, the pair left the house and she hadn't seen them since. Given what Anthony had said, she was now concerned for her daughter's safety as well. Police located the pair and started digging into these claims. 4th of June, early evening. Knock Timothy had been painfully anticipating came at the door. The minute he saw the officers, he said, "She's dead, isn't she?" Detectives confirmed that they had just found his daughter's body. Cynthia had been discovered along the Eklutna riverbank. She was bound with duct tape, and she had been shot in the back of the head before being pushed into the river. Officers believed that she had been killed before Timothy had even reported her as missing. And it is unconfirmed whether or not the shot killed her instantly or if she was still alive when she was put into the water. It was impossible for the Hoffmans to contemplate who on earth would want to do this to Cynthia. She never spoke of having any problems with anyone. She had lots of friends and was so loved by those around her. Before long, a web of lies would start to unravel, showing the twisted and disturbing reality of what had happened and why. And given what Denali's mother Nicole had told the police, officers were only looking at Denali and Anthony for answers. Anthony was actually a 16-year-old called Caden McIntosh, a teen living on the streets at the time. On the 5th of June, Caden McIntosh was arrested, and 2 days later, so was Denali Bremer. The pair were initially quiet, and Denali was even granted bail. But after her phone was looked at, she was pulled back in, and the pair would soon start to talk. It quickly became apparent that Denali had attempted to delete threads of messages, which fortunately be easily recovered. She had been texting someone called Tyler, a man she had started an online relationship with, and the conversations between the pair were extremely dark. Tyler told her he was very wealthy and lived in Kansas, almost 4,000 miles away. The police found child pornography on Denali's phone as well, and a string of explicit images of children that Denali had sent to Tyler for his approval. The more the pair spoke, the more disturbing things became. Tyler soon told Denali to sexually assault an 8-year-old and send him videos of it. After this, he wanted her to assault a 14-year-old as well. The text threads between the pair were graphic. One message from Tyler read, "So are you going to the 14-year-old? Gonna go by weed first?" Denali replied, "I want to get her high for it so she doesn't fight me. I love you. Soon we can rape together." After these assaults, Tyler texted Denali and told her he wanted to see more. He wanted her to rape and murder someone. In exchange, he said that he would pay her $9 million. Denali then set about recruiting people to help her and get the plan in motion. She finally told police that she and Caden had picked Cynthia up and drove out about 20 miles away from her home, using a car owned by another teenager that she had promised $500,000 of the alleged money to, a 19-year-old called Caleb Leland. This gave police a fourth name to look at, but little did they know, this would soon become more. Denali said that she, Caden and Cynthia all drove around smoking marijuana together, something Timothy said he didn't see his daughter doing at all, and was likely pressured into doing in the first place, if it was even true. After this, they drove out to a parking lot near the Thunderbird Falls Trail with the intention of going on a hike. But instead of following the trail, they abandoned it and followed another path that ran alongside the Eklutna River. They all walked along until they found an isolated clearing. Denardi claimed that the three of them agreed to duct tape each other and take photographs as part of a joke or prank. In the clearing was bound by her ankles and wrists and had tape put over her mouth. Cynthia soon realized this was not a joke and started to panic. She started shouting that she was going to call the police. Denali held a gun to her head, which she eventually let Caden take off her. Caden then shot Cynthia in the back of the head. In Caden's interview, he admitted to duct taping Cynthia and said that he had blacked out, but remembered shooting her and pushing her into the river. As much as Denali was trying to distance herself, she had been documenting the whole ordeal on her phone, sending photographs and videos to Tyler via Snapchat, showing that she was someone who was very much involved. Although Tyler said he wanted to see a rape as well as a murder, there was no evidence to suggest that Cynthia had been sexually assaulted. To the police, Denali spoke of being afraid of Caden, implying she was following his suit, as well as being tricked by Tyler. However, Denali had not only brought and held the loaded gun, she photographed and filmed the entire thing, and had engaged in numerous conversations with Tyler about all kinds of horrifying things up until that point. Police felt confident that Tyler and Denali were ringleaders together. After Cynthia had been pushed into the river, Denali and Caden then went back to the car and made a pact to contact Cynthia's family to say that she had been dropped off at the park. After this, they set about burning and disposing of Cynthia's purse, clothes, and ID in Lions Park, in northeast Anchorage. They even attempted to burn the gun. Denali later texted Tyler and said, "I wish I never made a deal with you in the first place. We can meet, but once I see a cop, I'm telling him or her that I made you rape people and kill Cece." But as the police already suspected, Tyler wasn't who he claimed he was either. The man behind the screen was actually 21-year-old Darren Schillmiller. He wasn't a millionaire and he wasn't living in Kansas. He lived in New Salisbury, Indiana. When he was tracked down and questioned, he confessed to everything, including convincing Denali that he was a millionaire and that he would pay her to assault and kill Cynthia. He also admitted that he and Denali had discussed murdering someone else after Cynthia was dead. Those that knew Darren Schillmiller or Tyler said his dark thoughts had always been obvious. When he was a teenager, he had started asking very young girls to send him explicit photographs, often making up fake profiles and going by fake names online as well. People described him as off and creepy. As he got older, he started asking people to send him photos of their children, sometimes while they were being changed or bathed. He also had a fetish for dirty diapers and often wanted to see photographs of those too. He had previously been the subject of a child pornography investigation, but no charges were filed and the case collapsed. When he told Denali he wanted her to find someone to kill, she made the choice quickly. She chose Cynthia because she was her closest friend. She thought it would be easier to use the trust that Cynthia had for her to lure her away without her questioning it. Timothy said, her disability just made her want to have friends. That's all she wanted, was just to be her friend. Detectives subpoenaed Verizon for Darren's phone data, and all the footage of the minors Denali had heard up until that point were found, along with more evidence that highlighted Darren's sick perversions. They also uncovered a Snapchat video that Denali had uploaded after Cynthia had been killed, in which she said, "I'm sorry everybody, my family, my friends. I guess you will hear from me when you hear from me, but I won't be back for a long time. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it." In the background of the video, Caden could be seen pacing around as well. A grand jury would soon indict 6 individuals in Cynthia Hoffman's case: Darren Schulmiller, Denali Brahma, Caden McIntosh, Caleb Leland, who had given them the car, and 2 other teens, who have not been named due to their ages. They were all indicted on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and murder in the second degree. 16-year-old Caden was charged as an adult, and as well as murder, he also faced 4 counts of tampering with evidence. The 2 juveniles, a male and a female, admitted to knowing about and being present for the planning of the murder in exchange for a cut of the money. Caleb was also accused of sexually assaulting the female juvenile suspect and faces additional charges of sexual assault and sexual abuse of a minor, as well as murder charges. Darren and Denali were indicted on more counts of solicitation to commit murder in the first degree, and then faced further charges of production of child pornography, conspiracy to produce child pornography, distribution of child pornography, and the coercion and enticement of a minor. All 6 individuals entered pleas of not guilty. Denali addressed the court and even spoke of having a child herself, something which had not been mentioned before this point. She said, "Don't want my daughter knowing that her mom grew up a killer because I don't see myself as one." Denali's sister spoke to the media and said they were devastated that she could be involved in something like this. Denali is the 3rd child of 5 girls. Her older sisters, Rebecca and Branna, said that all of the children had been removed from the care of their mother at different points, and the abuse reached a tipping point when the man living with their mother at the time killed their 2-month-old baby sister, Gabrielle. Denali was adopted in her early childhood, but both her sisters said the trauma may have lingered and potentially might have been the cause of several issues in adulthood. "We all had really hard lives, and I feel like she took the wrong road with the wrong people who didn't care about her, and now she's paying the ultimate cost," said Brenner. The pending hearing and trials have all been delayed and postponed several times for various reasons. 56 gigabytes of material and over 100,000 pages of evidence and cell phone data was handed over in court, which is a huge amount to dissect and go through. This, coupled with lockdowns due to the pandemic, has pushed the trial dates back, and in January 2020, it was announced it would be some time before the dates were set. Timothy Hoffman said he would be in court at every opportunity, adding, "Nothing really disappoints me. I am prepared for a long journey. It was a shocking and sick case in every imaginable way. Murder, sexual assault, catfishing, manipulation, greed, and the ultimate betrayal in the most devastating way." Cynthia Hoffman was a determined young woman, someone who had faced challenges and adversity and had pushed through all of it, determined to always give her all and make her family proud. Her life came to an end in a terrifying way at the hands of someone she trusted and would never have doubted. Mansfield, a fascinating and historic market town in Nottinghamshire in the UK, with gorgeous architecture and a remarkable history. There really is plenty to do and see here. One of the people that called this place home was 18-year-old Liam Gray. Liam had been born into a loving family and was one of 4 children, having 3 siblings, Paige, Madison, and Freddie. Liam was popular and well-loved by those who knew him, with his mother Jo and describing him as happy-go-lucky. He loved to make people laugh and have fun, never taking himself too seriously. He was a passionate supporter of his beloved Liverpool Football Club, and one of his former teachers said he had a heart of gold and always looked out for and cared for other people. He was also close to his grandfather John, affectionately known as Pops, and Liam would move in with him when he was in his teens, after having a tough time at school. He had a close group of friends and an especially close bond with Reese, his best friend. The pair were as close as brothers and spent most of their time together, with Madison calling them inseparable. They had grown up together and gone to the same schools, and their friendship had gone from strength to strength. Reese lived across the road from Liam and Pops, and Reese was equally close to Pops, saying he would be lost without him. Liam and his grandfather lived on Gladstone Street, and after moving, Liam introduced Reese to one of his other friends, Jonathan Treadgold. 17-year-old Jonathan's early life had been troubled, and he had spent various times in the care of social services, following drug use and domestic violence in the family home. He was also having run-ins with the law from the age of 14, with a criminal record including threatening behavior and criminal damage. Liam, being the caring young man he was, decided to take Jonathan under his wing and try and be there for him as a friend and a support system. He recognized that Jonathan had various struggles and wanted to help him turn his life around. Joan wasn't too sure though. She said there was just something about Jonathan that bothered her, and she wasn't keen on her son hanging around with him. Liam's sister had also heard things about Jonathan and his behavior, but she was prepared to put that aside, give him a chance and judge for herself what he was like. Liam invited Jonathan to hang out with him, on one occasion asking him if he wanted to go to a family party at Joanne's house. Jonathan had far too much to drink and became more and more angry and volatile, culminating in him assaulting someone. Liam was still determined to be there for Jonathan and showcased the same deep loyalty that he showed to all his friends. When he was 17, got news that changed everything. His partner was expecting a baby. Liam was elated, excited to become a father and throw himself into the challenges and joys of parenthood that awaited him. Reese said that Liam was over the moon. With impending fatherhood, Liam continued to mature, and knowing that it was going to be a monumental change in his life, he began to see his friends less as he prepared to meet his new baby. On the 18th of July, 2019, Liam and his partner of 3 years welcomed their first child, a baby girl. Life was good and Liam was happy. August 1st, 2019, it was a bright and beautiful summer's day in Mansfield. On the August 2nd, Liam and his partner were moving to Birmingham with their baby to start their next chapter as a family. Whilst his family were going to miss him and were sad he was moving away, they supported him and he was ready to take the leap. He decided to spend his last day in Mansfield with his two closest friends. Liam, Jonathan, and Reese were seen going into a local shop to purchase alcohol before going back to Pop's house on Gladstone Street. They sat in the garden and drank and filmed a series of Snapchat videos whilst there. Liam asked Jonathan if he was going to change out of his tracksuit bottoms to make himself look a bit smarter, as he wasn't yet 18 and he didn't want him to draw attention to himself. Liam said he could wear a pair of his jeans if he wanted to, and after Jonathan got changed, the three of them headed off to a nearby pub. As they were walking through the park, received a message. It was from Jonathan's sister's boyfriend, the contents of which are not clear, but it sparked an argument. Reese showed the message to the other two, and Liam claimed he would hit the male who had sent the message in an attempt to stick up for Jonathan's sister. Jonathan grew incredibly angry, and the argument continued to escalate. As the situation got worse, Liam told him if he was going to keep behaving like that, he needed to go away and leave the jeans back at the house. After Jonathan had gone, Liam wanted to try and de-escalate the situation and not have his last day ruined. So they agreed to go back to the house to get Jonathan and try and salvage the rest of the day. When Jonathan arrived at the house, Pops was there in the living room. Liam and Reese got back just 4 minutes later, and Liam was keen to try and resolve the argument. Reese waited outside. Roughly a minute later, Jonathan came running out of the house, telling Reese, "I've stabbed him." Jonathan then ran away. Reese immediately went inside, unsure as to whether or not it was all just hot air, or if he had actually hurt Liam. When Reese went inside, he found Liam in the dining room. He was bleeding profusely from his chest and holding tea towels there to try and stop it before asking for the emergency services. Reese called 999 and then gave the phone to Pops for him to talk to the operator. Liam then fell to the floor and Pops tried his best to help him and administer aid, putting pressure on the wound to try and stop the bleed. When the paramedics arrived on scene, Reese ran out to meet them. They tried to stabilize him as much as possible and treat his injuries. The police were also dispatched, and when they got there they put Reese into the back of their car. The news soon made it to Joe and that Pop's house had the emergency services outside and that Liam had been stabbed by Jonathan. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead would dispatch more officers as they needed to find Jonathan and find him quickly. They would soon get some important information. The police received a call from the owner of a local sandwich shop, saying that Jonathan was climbing over the wall at the back of the shop. He told the owner that he had been involved in a serious incident and had acted in self-defense, lifting up his shirt and appearing to show injuries. The police immediately linked it to the stabbing of Liam and sent more officers over there to arrest Jonathan. At 3:15 p.m., Joanne and one of Liam's sisters arrived at the house on Gladstone Street. The crew were still there and still battling to save him. They'd had to cut his chest open and manually keep his heart going. The paramedics decided against taking him to hospital in the air ambulance, as this would have meant they could not work on him whilst in the air. So the decision was made to transport him to the hospital by road. Liam was then put into the back of the ambulance and Joanne was taken to see him by an officer. She told him that she loved him as her beloved son fought for his life. He was then rushed to Queen's Medical Center in Nottingham. The police were still hunting for Jonathan Treadgold, who had run away from the sandwich shop. But then, another call came in. Person said he was at a house in Moundsfield where his mother was visiting a friend. He had told his mother and her friend that he had stabbed Liam and that Liam was dead. The arrest was caught on the police's body cam footage at 3:33 p.m. He told the officers that Liam had been the one to instigate it and had tried to stab him and that he had acted in self-defense. He was arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. Several hours after his arrest he was breathalyzed, and even after the time that had passed his blood alcohol level was still 3 times the legal drink-drive limit, so he had clearly consumed a significant amount of alcohol. After getting to the hospital, Liam was taken straight into open-heart surgery to try and save him. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff and after an hour and a half of trying to keep him alive, Liam succumbed to his injuries and died. Liam's sister Paige would later say, "I just remember a doctor walking in with 2 nurses, and I knew then from the look on the doctor's face that Liam had passed. She ran out of the room and had a panic attack." Joanne said she knew in that moment too that he had gone and that her heart shattered. She tried to call her other daughter Madison, who initially didn't answer. When she answered the second call, she said it felt like a piece of her was now gone too. Madison collapsed, unable to process what was happening. Those in the community could not believe it and were in total shock, and many people shared tributes to him talking about how he had impacted their lives and just how much he was going to be missed. Joanne thanked the local community for all of their support and love, saying, "A post-mortem revealed that Liam had no defensive wounds and the pathologist determined that it had been a jabbing motion when he had been stabbed. The knife had pierced his heart." Despite initially being arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm, this was now a murder inquiry. The police began to go through the CCTV footage to piece together the events of that day and try and work out how this had all come to be. They watched the footage of them going into the shop and buying the alcohol. Nothing seemed unusual and everything looked fine. They were then caught walking down the road before stopping in the park. The park was not covered by CCTV cameras. In his interviews, Jonathan said he had fled the park in a hurry after the argument had broken out in order to get away from Liam. But the footage showed him walking and not running. Liam and Reese were seen on CCTV walking back too. Jonathan was interviewed again, where he now said although he had picked the knife up, he had done so in self-defense and that he had been waving it around to scare him off, and this was how Liam had been stabbed. But based on what Pops had seen when he witnessed the attack and what was known about Jonathan's past, including a conviction 6 weeks prior for assaulting his girlfriend, his version of events just was not stacking up. The CCTV footage showed Jonathan running from Gladstone Street just 1 minute after Liam had gone into the house. When police searched the house, they found the knife in the kitchen, covered in Liam's blood and Jonathan's fingerprints. Jonathan also alleged in his interviews that Liam had bullied and picked on him for years and showed scars on his body, saying Liam had caused them. But the investigation would reveal the truth. The police investigating Liam's death trawled through the various records of social services, and they determined that the healed scars on Jonathan's body had not been caused by Liam but were instead self-inflicted. There was nothing to substantiate his claims that Liam had bullied him or treated him badly. Superintendent Kevin Broadhead said he believed that Jonathan was jealous of Liam starting a new life with his family in Birmingham and beginning an exciting chapter, when his own life was so chaotic. Based on all of the evidence they had gathered, Jonathan Treadgold was charged with murder. On the 18th of August, a fundraising event was held to generate funds to pay for a funeral for Liam, raise money for his newborn baby, and donate to a charity tackling knife crime. A GoFundMe was also set up. When his funeral was held, hundreds of mourners lined the streets as his coffin, draped in a Liverpool Football Club flag, was taken into St. Peter and St. Paul's Church. Those following the coffin wore shirts with a photograph of Liam on them, with "Always loved, never forgotten, forever missed" written on them too. Liam's devastated grandfather, who had tried to save his life, paid tribute to him. "Liam, I'm missing you terribly. I tried so much to help you, and I lived that day every day. My best was not good enough, and I am so sorry. I hope you are happy with the angels. Love you forever." The reverend conducting the service told those in attendance, "We need to go away not remembering the manner of Liam's death and the tragedy that it is, But remember the gift of life he was to each and every one of you here. And we go away with the message, bend the knife. We want young people to grow up safe, to not have their lives taken or destroyed. The funeral was a reflection of just how loved Liam was, how much of an impact he had on those he knew. Because he was 17 when the stabbing took place, Jonathan Treadgold was tried as a child, something that greatly upset Joanne. On the 1st of November, he appeared in court and entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. He was told his trial would begin the following year. Because of his not guilty plea, the defense requested a second postmortem to be carried out on Liam's body. Joanne said it was disgraceful that he was putting Liam's family through yet more pain and devastation with his not guilty plea. Also, due to his age, there was initially a ban on his name and identity being reported. The Mansfield Chad newspaper made an application for the restrictions to be lifted, and the judge remarked, and with that, Jonathan Treadgold was unmasked and named in the press. Throughout the trial, Liam's family wore shirts with his face on it, showing that no matter how painful it was going to be, they were going to be there for him and his memory. During the proceedings, Jonathan was disrespectful and disruptive in court. He wouldn't take to the stand, he wouldn't speak, and he would not give any reason as to why he had stabbed Liam, someone who had been a good and loyal friend, and really looked after him. Paige said that she could tell from the look on his face that he wasn't sorry for what he had done at all. The evidence put before the court painted a devastating picture. A young man, a new father, about to start a new chapter in his life, taken in a violent and disturbing attack. February 7, 2020. The jury returned their verdict. Jonathan Treadgold was unanimously found guilty and showed no emotion as the verdict was given. All he said was sound. Shouts of yes could be heard from the public gallery as Liam's family were elated that he had been convicted of his murder. Outside the courts, Joanne read a statement on behalf of the family. We will never see Liam again, hear his laugh, or see our phones flash with an incoming call from him. He was stolen from our lives. We'd like to thank everyone who tried to help and save Liam, and we appreciate everything they did. Monday, the 10th of February 2020. At Nottingham Crown Court, Jonathan Treadgold was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison for the murder of Liam Gray. Just as Gregory Dixon said, this was done in anger, drink, and spite, not in fear. The judge added that he could serve longer than 16 years, as it would be for the parole board to determine whether or not he was safe to be released. And if they deemed that he wasn't, then he would stay in custody. Following his sentencing, Joanne said, I don't think it's long enough, but there's not much more to say. The murder of Liam Gray was a senseless, tragic, and brutal one. Paige said she reminds his daughter of him every day, adding that she gets her personality from Liam. As she continues to grow up surrounded by the love of her family, the legacy of her beloved father will continue to live on through her. The tragedy of this case is best summed up by the words of his mother, Joanne. There are so many things that Liam never got to do. He hadn't learned to drive, been to college, got a stable job, got married, bought a house, or had the chance to parent his daughter and watch her grow up. We as a family have been robbed of watching him do all that too. Louise Martin, known as Kathy to her family and friends, was born on October 25, 1959. She crossed paths with Mike Odom during their high school years at the tender age of 16. Their young love blossomed, leading them to the decision of marriage. However, their plans were put on hold when Mike faced legal troubles for selling heroin to an undercover officer. Despite this setback, Kathy remained steadfast in her commitment to eagerly awaiting his release from prison. 2 years later, they finally tied the knot and welcomed two beautiful children, Tasha and Sean, into the world. The Odom family resided in the opulent Harris County, Texas, where Kathy's father, Frankie Martin, graciously offered Mike a position at his sign business. Kathy poured her heart and soul into ensuring the success of their marriage, earning her reputation as a devoted mother who would move mountains for her beloved children. Tragedy struck on the fateful night of March 3, 1987, when Mike, away on business, attempted to reach Kathy but received no response. Concerned, he enlisted the help of a neighbor to check on his family. What they discovered was a scene of horror. Tasha, brutally beaten and unconscious, Sean unharmed, and Kathy, lifeless and mutilated in their bedroom. The heinous crime left the community in shock, with officers fearing the return of the perpetrator to finish what they had started. Tasha and Sean were both transported to the hospital, and it was mandated that they must not be left unattended. Kathy's father, Frankie, arrived at the crime scene and was instructed to go to the hospital to be with his grandchildren. While at the hospital, Frankie witnessed the events surrounding his daughter on a television screen. Meanwhile, Mike finally arrived back at the house, where the police officers paid close attention to his appearance. One of the officers observed red stains on Mike's shirt that resembled blood. A search of the Odom's residence uncovered blood in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator, potentially Mike, had attempted to clean up before departing. There were no signs of a forced entry, as all doors were secured except for the front door, suggesting that Kathy was familiar with her assailant. The multiple stab wounds on Kathy's body suggested a personal motive behind the crime. The neatly folded clothes found on the floor also provided clues to the investigators. It was theorized that the attacker targeted Tasha in order to gain access to Kathy. Tasha remained in critical condition at the hospital, in a coma and dependent on IVs as doctors fought to save her life. The focus of the investigation shifted towards Mike Odom, Tasha's father, who displayed emotional distress. However, investigators harbored suspicions about him due to inconsistencies in his alibi. Mike's clothing was sent to the forensic lab for analysis. Additionally, peculiar stains were discovered on the car floor of the neighbor, Tim Robinson, leading investigators to believe that Tim and Mike conspired to commit the crime. The possibility of Mike relapsing and seeking insurance money was also considered. Yet, a surprising turn of events was about to unfold. The estimations of the medical examiner suggest that Kathy's life was taken approximately 6 hours prior to the discovery of her body, which would place the time of her demise around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both Mike and Tim adamantly claim to have been diligently working during that time. As investigators meticulously scrutinized their alibis, a crucial witness emerged, none other than 4-year-old Tasha Odom. Emerging from her coma, Tasha recounted to investigators that she vividly remembers a man entering the house, describing him as having yellow hair. However, neither Mike Odom nor Tim Robinson possessed blonde hair. Regrettably, the man's hair color was the only detail Tasha could recall. Subsequent forensic tests revealed that the stains found in Tim's car were motor oil, while the stains on Mike's shirt were paint. Moreover, their coworkers provided unwavering alibis for both individuals, and they both successfully passed polygraph tests. Consequently, Mike and Tim were exonerated, allowing investigators to shift their focus to the next suspect. This individual was none other than Kathy's sister, Charlene Martin, who was married to Greg Marquardt. Their tumultuous relationship began thanks to Mike, as Greg and Mike had been closely associated in the drug scene. Charlene, like Kathy, was only 16 years old when she met the man she would eventually marry. Greg, who was 25 at the time, should have raised eyebrows. The couple tied the knot in 1983, and soon after both Charlene and Kathy spiraled into addiction, mirroring Greg and Mike's destructive path. Charlene was known for stealing from her own parents for financial gain. However, Greg's affluent aunt and uncle repaid the Martins and legal actions were avoided. While Mike and Kathy managed to turn their lives around, Greg and Shelley continued their criminal activities, leading to frequent incarcerations. Prior to Kathy's untimely demise, she confided in a friend about Greg's inappropriate advances towards her, which she promptly rebuffed, while Shelley was occupied in another room with the baby. On hearing this, the investigators questioned Greg about his alibi on the night of Kathy's murder. Greg stated that he was not with his wife on the night of the crime. He was in the company of a man named Hampton Robinson III. It is worth noting that Robinson was an acquaintance of Charles Harrelson, who was the father of actor Woody Harrelson and was convicted of killing a judge in 1982. Robinson had testified against Harrelson during his trial. Despite the police finding Greg's fingerprints and hair at the crime scene, it was argued that as a family member who had visited the house multiple times, this did not necessarily indicate guilt. Kathy's parents expressed their belief to investigators that Greg was responsible. 2 days after Kathy's death, Frankie received a late-night call from the hospital where Tasha was being treated, informing him that Shelley and Greg had attempted to visit. Frankie instructed the hospital not to allow them in, citing suspicions about Greg and the unusual timing of their visit. Tasha's grandmother, Charlene Martins, recalled that Tasha reacted with fear upon seeing Greg at the hospital and he was asked to leave. When questioned about the incident, Tasha could not recall if it was her uncle Greg she saw with Kathy on the day of the attack due to her head injury. Greg, while denying any involvement, openly admitted his attraction to Kathy, particularly to her stomach. This preference was known to Kathy's friends, and it is notable that she was primarily stabbed in the stomach. During the interview, Greg requested to leave to refill a parking meter but did not return. He also declined to take a polygraph test, prompting investigators to further scrutinize his alibi. Shelley recounted that Greg chauffeured her to school at 10:30 a.m. on the day of the crime and retrieved her at 2:30 p.m. This luxurious 4-hour time frame provided ample opportunity for Greg to carry out the crime. The medical examiner pinpointed the time of her demise around 1 p.m. that fateful day. Despite Kathy's unfortunate ordeal, this incident unfolded in an era predating the widespread use of DNA in cold case inquiries. Back then, serology was the method of choice involving the intricate process of blood group typing. This technique was arduous, requiring a substantial sample size to yield results. The outcome was merely a blood type lacking definitive proof. The blood type extracted from the evidence found on Kathy's body matched Greg Marquardt's blood type, type O, shared by approximately half the population, rendering it inconclusive. With insufficient evidence, the case languished in obscurity for a considerable period. For Frankie, the realization that the perpetrator of his daughter's demise was wedded to his other daughter was a harrowing revelation. In 1998, a specialized cold case unit was established, with Kathy Odom's case being one of their initial investigations. By then, DNA testing had advanced significantly, enabling the extraction of a DNA profile from the biological evidence in Kathy's case. The results indicated that Greg Marquardt belonged to the exclusive 2% of the populace who could have been the culprit, a marked improvement from the previous 50% probability. Greg promptly provided investigators with an alibi, claiming he was engaged in a consensual relationship with Kathy and was in her company on the morning of her demise. He maintained that she was alive when he departed. Despite doubts cast on his account, Greg remained unapprehended due to insufficient evidence for a conviction. The crucial task was to establish his presence at the scene of the crime. Investigators sought the expertise of Catherine Long, employed at Orchid Cellmark, a prestigious private forensic laboratory in Dallas, Texas. Catherine devised a unique plan to unravel the mystery surrounding Kathy's crime. She and her team engaged in a peculiar activity of choking each other to see if skin cells would be transferred from the perpetrator to the victim. Astonishingly, they discovered a significant exchange of skin cells during the act. The investigators scoured through Kathy's evidence file in search of any trace of the perpetrator's skin cells. Their focus shifted to the electrical cord that was used to bind Kathy's hands. Fortunately, the cord had been stored in a paper bag rather than a plastic one. The paper bag's breathable nature ensured that the item remained dry, thus extending the lifespan of the DNA. This preservation method proved to be more effective than storing it in a plastic bag. The blood-stained cord was meticulously swabbed by the investigators to gather all possible evidence. Subsequent testing unveiled 2 genetic profiles, Kathy Odom's and Greg Marquardt's. The presence of Marquardt's DNA on the cord indicated his involvement as the perpetrator. Finally, on December 18, 2002, Greg Marquardt was apprehended and charged with Kathy's murder. During his time in prison, Marquardt confessed to a fellow inmate, revealing that he was under the influence of heroin when he committed the heinous act. His chilling account of the events that transpired at Kathy's house shed light on the brutal truth. The advancements in DNA technology ultimately led to his identification as the culprit 15 years after the crime. 6 months following his arrest, Greg's affluent aunt passed away, bequeathing him with hundreds of thousands of dollars and a share in her opulent abode. The Martins opted to take legal action against him, entangling the estate in a legal battle that hindered him from utilizing those funds for his defense. In 2004, Greg Marquardt entered a plea of guilty and was found guilty on all counts. By July of the same year, he was handed a 45-year prison sentence. After serving 4 years of his term, he succumbed to liver disease in 2008 at the age of 56. Sergeant Roger Wedgeworth was quoted as saying, "Couldn't happen to a more deserving individual." Shelley and her parents lost touch following the crime. While they believed in his culpability, she stood by Marquardt's side. It was rumored that Shelley continued to stand by Marquardt and maintained his innocence for an extended period. A couple of years post the crime, the Martins relocated to Oklahoma. Subsequently, it appeared that Shelley reconciled with her parents and she too relocated to Oklahoma to be in close proximity to them. Kathy's father, Frankie, expressed, "It does not bring back Kathy. I will always cherish her memory, the home she created, and the moments we shared. Losing a child is always a profound sorrow." In the early days of April 2011, a peculiar sight greeted the neighbors of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann in Nantes, France. The shutters of the Dupont de Ligonnès family home remained tightly closed, a stark contrast to their usual vibrant atmosphere. The absence of the usual sounds of laughter and play from the children and their pets raised concerns among the neighbors. Accustomed to the family's habit of leaving their shutters open, the closed windows prompted the worried neighbors to contact the local authorities. After several fruitless inspections, it was during the fifth visit that the police made a chilling discovery. Versailles, in the western suburbs of Paris, is where Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligonnès and his wife Geneviève Therese. In 1966, a daughter named Christine joined the family. After Bernard left his wife for another woman, Xavier stepped up to take care of his mother and sister. Geneviève believed she received divine messages, which she wrote down during automatic writing sessions reminiscent of a surrealist poet. Her unusual beliefs eventually turned into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to create a cult called the Church of Philadelphia. The group included aristocrats who Geneviève convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and help rebuild the world. Christine was chosen by her mother to give birth to the Savior. According to Geneviève, the child would be a combination of Jesus and Satan destined to bring salvation. Despite being the heir to his father's noble title, Xavier was more interested in luxury fancy cars and peculiarities than French traditions. He also had a great admiration for the United States. Geneviève supported Xavier's extravagant lifestyle with significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy. In 1974, on the idyllic island of Brea, Xavier met Emmanuel Tenier. The two boys formed a strong bond of understanding that lasted a lifetime. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their friendship remained strong. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnes Hodanger. Agnes, born on November 9, 1962 in Neuilly-sur-Seine near Paris, was known for her deep religious devotion and worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where she taught catechism. Although there is limited information available about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnes shared a close bond, resulting in a passionate yet short-lived romance before parting ways. In 1990, Agnes welcomed her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Shortly after, she and Xavier rekindled their love, eventually tying the knot. Xavier embraced Arthur as his own child. 2 years later, they celebrated the arrival of their first biological son, Thomas, who would carry on the family name. To mark this special moment, Xavier selected Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, Agnes and Xavier expanded their family with 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 embodied the image of an ideal household, with Xavier portraying a caring father and the children excelling academically, hinting at a bright future ahead. Agnes was devoted to nurturing her children's faith, often taking them to church. She was perceived by other parents as gentle yet firm with her kids. Around 2000, Xavier relocated his family to the United States to align with their interests and preferences. Despite Xavier's discreet, charismatic, and multilingual nature, his attempt to seamlessly integrate in the U.S. proved unsuccessful, resulting in substantial financial setbacks. Upon their return to France, Xavier found himself burdened with mounting debts stemming from his somewhat ambiguous professional endeavors. Various inquiries have labeled him as a salesman. Reports from French media outlets indicate that financial issues had been a pressing concern for Xavier over the years. Among his unsuccessful ventures was a peculiar plan to import cars from the U.S. to France. He also ventured into several small businesses, such as a guide for sales representatives in the hotel and restaurant industry, a customer loyalty program for restaurants, an organization named the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet enterprise where he held the title of manager. The financial situation of the last business venture was quite limited, prompting the hiring of 6 salespeople in 2003. Xavier's work commitments often kept him away from home during the weekdays, resulting in a modest income of approximately $4,200 annually. Over time, financial challenges began to strain his marriage, possibly exacerbated by common marital disagreements. Agnes extensively shared their struggles on a French forum in 2004, mentioning an unsettling comment made by Xavier about a family group death not being catastrophic. By 2009, the mounting debt significantly affected their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for their family's problems and holding her accountable for their financial downfall. This emotional turmoil had a profound impact on Agnes, causing loss of appetite and insomnia. Xavier sought help from his friend Emmanuel on multiple occasions. Emmanuel, coming from a wealthy background, generously supported Xavier financially. Despite living modestly in a small apartment, an enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, Emmanuel never hesitated to lend Xavier substantial amounts of money. Apart from financial aid, Emmanuel also financed Xavier's travels and co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity in the late 2000s, the family lived in a chalet on 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann in the suburbs west of Nantes. Upon settling in, neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was domineering and less amiable compared to her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal struggle, perceiving Xavier as both fragile and paradoxically rigid, almost militaristic. As the traditional head of the household, Xavier was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and at times even abusive. Agnes shared her concerns about Genevieve's influence over Xavier with her friends from the Thursday prayer group. She described her mother-in-law as a troubled mystic, causing her deep fear. When Bernard passed away on January 20, 2011, Xavier hoped for an inheritance due to his father's financial capacity. However, he was shocked to find almost nothing in his father's estate except for a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier took immediately. Shortly after Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card and obtained a firearms license on February 2nd. By March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle and even bought quicklime. Xavier practiced shooting in his garden, explaining to his friend Emmanuel that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On April 1st, they went to a shooting range together, focusing on Bernard's inherited rifle. The next day, Emmanuel called Xavier multiple times and they had a long conversation. Investigations suggest that the tragic events began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and had a pleasant dinner at a restaurant. Everyone was there except for Thomas, who was studying nearby. After returning home, neighbors saw them, and family members exchanged messages with friends. Xavier messaged Christine about their dinner. The prevailing theory is that Xavier drugged his family, waited for them to sleep, then shot and buried them in the garden, including the 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier meticulously crafted his alibi, starting on Monday morning by reaching out to individuals within his family circle. He made calls as early as 6 a.m., informing Agnes's workplace of her illness, contacting the children's schools with fabricated stories about their well-being. By midday, he even went as far as sending a letter to Arthur's workplace, stating that his son was resigning due to Xavier's transfer to Australia. However, Xavier still had to handle Thomas. On the same Monday, April 4th, he met with Thomas for dinner at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The next day, Thomas received a distressing message from his father, claiming Agnes was in a coma after a bicycle accident, prompting Thomas to rush to Nantes. It is suspected that Xavier murdered Thomas in the same manner as his other family members. Later that evening, Xavier had a conversation with Emmanuel, lasting just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was watching a movie with his father at home. However, Thomas was likely already deceased by then. Approximately an hour later, emailed Emmanuel to arrange a meeting, with Emmanuel reminding him of the power of attorney and the key on the sailboat. Surprisingly, Xavier did not act discreetly, moving in and out of his house, leaving a note on the door and making transactions with his credit cards under his real name. As Xavier's flawless escape plan unfolded, neighbors began to notice concerning signs. The chalet's once open windows had been shut for days. The local children no longer spotted the family's 4 kids. The dogs' barking had stopped and Agnes was nowhere to be found at work. It was as if they had all vanished into thin air. Concerned neighbors pieced together the clues and contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with just a few jars of preserves, a still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa were also discovered. The Dupont de Ligonnat family seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets were devoid of clothes. In the midst of the mystery, a letter surfaced on April 9th, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been recruited by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, that the family had to go into hiding as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of contact. Neighbors grew suspicious and worried, feeling that something was amiss about the story. Fearing for the family's safety, they urged authorities to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Xavier set off on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past came to light. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, grabbed a bag, and vanished into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Interestingly, on the same day, Emmanuel called his mother, confessing hidden truths. He was gay, struggling with alcoholism and battling depression. Responding to the neighbors' concerns and the lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21, 2011, an officer noticed a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace. They soon uncovered a concrete slab and moments later made a chilling discovery. The corpses of Agnes and her 4 offspring were discovered ensconced in sacks, each bearing 2 to 3 bullet wounds and adorned with religious symbols. They were meticulously interred in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also laid to rest. Despite an exhaustive investigation, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were unearthed. Xavier swiftly became the most sought-after individual in France, accused of the heinous crime. His visage dominated the headlines, earning him monikers such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Slayer, and the Epitome of Terror. However, he seemed to have inexplicably vanished without a trace. The post-mortem results of the 5 victims indicated to authorities that they were victims of a carefully orchestrated massacre. The majority of the bullets were aimed at their heads. Furthermore, traces of a sedative were detected in the children, supporting the theory that they were attacked while asleep. A shocking revelation emerged concerning Agnes. In the main bedroom, investigators discovered a device she used for her sleep apnea, which had ceased functioning precisely at 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier may have hesitated to harm Thomas as he was the family's heir. Due to the strong bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during the initial questioning, suggesting that Xavier's disappearance was a form of spiritual journey before taking his own life. When asked about the rifle, Emmanuel initially feigned ignorance. However, further scrutiny into his background uncovered discrepancies, leading authorities to realize that he was not entirely truthful. A significant breakthrough occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police raided Emmanuel's residence. They seized his laptop, prompting Emmanuel to divulge his true knowledge about Xavier's firearm. A subsequent examination of the hard drive unveiled extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. Correspondence between them varied from the ordinary to the profound, with certain emails injecting a peculiar twist into their connection. One particular email dispatched in the early hours of April 6th piqued the interest of law enforcement. The accumulation of these intricate details prompted investigators to suspect that Emmanuel may have played a role in Xavier's escape. However, Emmanuel was not the sole individual under suspicion. Christine also came under the investigators' scrutiny during their questioning. Christine and Genevieve were evasive, presenting a superficial image of Xavier and denying any association with the Church of Philadelphia. Genevieve touched upon Xavier's upbringing but steered clear of uncomfortable subjects like the origin of their wealth and adamantly refuted the existence of the sect. Nevertheless, the persistence of the investigative team paid off. They stumbled upon a copy of a complaint lodged years ago by former sect members who had fled in terror after Christine suggested engaging in relations with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which boasted affluent members providing financial backing, proved to be pivotal. Investigators believed that this environment could have potentially offered Xavier logistical and material support. Consequently, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the sect's followers were closely monitored by the police in hopes of uncovering any slip-ups in their conversations or emails. Despite these extensive efforts, no concrete leads surfaced. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records enabled authorities to track his movements within the country. The final tangible trace of Xavier was captured in a security footage from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he may have been carrying a weapon in his bag based on its shape. While all signs pointed towards the possibility of him having taken his own life in the woods, detectives were left perplexed as thorough searches in the dense forest failed to yield any trace of his body or remains. This led to the hypothesis that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and transported to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued on May 4th. The Nantes police reached out to the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to investigate whether Emmanuel or Xavier possessed a motorboat or sailboat. Despite their efforts, no concrete evidence was found, acknowledging the possibility of outdated records. Emmanuel was called in for questioning on May 9th, which turned into an intense interrogation focused on locating a boat and identifying its owner. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Emmanuel dismissed any suspicions when asked about a sailboat reference, attributing it to chance. He disclosed that Xavier had power of attorney to access his safe deposit box in case of an emergency, with the key hidden on a model sailboat in an apartment. Inside the safe was only his will. Disappointed and empty-handed, the police released Emmanuel, leaving the investigation in a state of uncertainty. Despite the peculiarities, he was considered a mere witness at that point. While deliberating on further interrogation, the police decided to exert some pressure on Emmanuel, deeming him the most reliable accomplice. A crucial development arose when investigators discovered a $4,200 check signed by Emmanuel for Xavier's company, leading to the revelation of an undisclosed account in Monaco. Efforts to obtain the account statements were hindered by Monaco's stringent banking privacy laws. On September 28th, four officers revisited Emmanuel's home, where they found him disoriented and barely recognizable, surrounded by a desolate environment marked by empty alcohol bottles. The absence of communication from his friend weighed heavily on Emmanuel's mind, adding to his distress. The authorities no longer viewed him as a suspect, rather as a recluse, prompting them to question if they were on the wrong path. Xavier had transformed into one of France's most sought-after alleged criminals, possibly even on a global scale. In 2015, a journalist alleged to have received a letter from Xavier claiming he was still alive. Despite conducting handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses, the note did not provide any new leads. On January 9, 2018, a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argent was raided by the police following a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After an exhaustive 2-hour search, it was concluded that it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel passed away due to a heart attack. That same year, a man believed to be Xavier was apprehended at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another hypothesis proposed that Xavier could be in South America, particularly in Argentina, where his linguistic abilities and charm could aid him in blending in. Years have gone by, and the Church of Philadelphia not only endures, but has reportedly seen a resurgence. This secretive group, consisting of long-standing members who have secluded themselves from the world for nearly 4 decades, has been in the spotlight. In the summer of 2019, 2 siblings raised within the sect lodged fresh complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 20 years, these women have staunchly asserted that Xavier is alive, innocent, and concealed in the United States under a witness protection program. They argue that everything mentioned in the letter dated April 9th is entirely fabricated. While this may appear to be denial, it could also be a tactic to mask certain realities. Since 2011, the case has been shrouded in conjecture and erroneous leads, leading authorities through endless mazes. The burning question remains, will justice ever be served for Agnes and her offspring? Despite the grim prospects, there are those who hold on to the belief that the truth will eventually be unveiled. It is said that on February 4, 1989, at around 4:15 a.m., an intruder broke into an apartment in the 3100 block of Casa de Campo, San Mateo County, California. Using the kitchen knife he found in the apartment and abandoned it to hide his identity, the intruder used violence and threats to get into a woman's bed. He gave her a horrifying experience that included stabbing, strangling, and assault. Surprisingly, the victim managed to get the attacker to back down and immediately called the police. How did the assailant get in without being noticed? And who might this unidentified intruder be? With a population of 764,442, San Mateo County is well known for being close to Silicon Valley, which has an influence on its lifestyle by blending urban and suburban elements. Parks and historical sites are examples of recreational areas that add a cultural touch. While the crime rate is comparatively low when compared to other parts of California, the population is diverse and frequently involved in technology and innovation. The safety of the community is prioritized. In 2023, the John Harris Jr. cold case is brought up, bringing attention to one case of unsolved crime in this otherwise tranquil county. A violent incident occurred in the quiet neighborhood of San Mateo, California, in the early hours of February 4, 1989, leaving the 3100 block of Casa de Campo scarred for many years. In a disconcerting security lapse, a single man entered an apartment. His first action was cutting himself with a kitchen knife, a common object that was turned into a weapon. The burglar really went overboard when he proceeded to the victim's bedroom and began attacking her there as well as at her residence. The suspect launched a physical and psychological attack on her after climbing into the bed in which she was sleeping. He choked and stabbed the victim in what turned into a struggle for her life, barely missing her jugular vein. A deadly coincidence that spared her life. The woman showed an incredible will to live despite such horror. She fought back against the attacker, was hiding his face behind a bandana. Her fortitude was impressive, and she persuaded him to leave the apartment through a combination of bravery and quick thinking. This act of convincing the assailant to leave would later pique the interest and amazement of all who heard about the incident. The woman immediately called the police. When the police were alerted, they descended on the scene with a sense of urgency. They conducted interviews and meticulously processed the crime scene in search of fingerprints, DNA, or any other clue that could lead them to the perpetrator. They exerted great effort. The attacker's identity was still unknown despite the meticulous attention to detail. The trail became quiet and the leads grew cold as weeks turned into months and months into years. The assault case file was filled with notes and reports, but no definitive answers. The perpetrator of the horrifying crime within the walls of that apartment vanished into the ether, leaving behind a victim still dealing with the fallout, and a community in shock. The DNA evidence gathered from the Casa de Campo attack scene was stored for more than 30 years. A silent witness waiting for science to catch up. As DNA technology advanced, investigators did not let the case gather dust. They persevered in resubmitting the DNA evidence, hoping that each time there would be some revelation that would allow the truth to be heard. Their perseverance was rewarded. In December 2020, the evidence from that fateful night collided with the ongoing use of technology in forensic science. A match was discovered, an accomplishment that would have seemed almost miraculous to investigators in 1989. It turned out that the man identified by the DNA match, John Harris Jr., had resided in the victim's neighborhood. John Harris Jr. had stayed out of the public eye for the previous 30 years, even though their paths had not intentionally crossed. Following the event, he appeared to have lived in San Joaquin County, not too close to the crime scene, but far enough away to avoid being noticed. He had moved to Arizona by the time of the DNA match. Law enforcement and the community were both touched by the revelation that the suspect was leading a regular life, and may have thought that his chances of success had diminished with the passage of time. After Harris's identification, the case gained fresh momentum after going cold. New leads were now shedding light on questions that had lingered for years. Equipped with fresh data and a name, the inquiry team began piecing together John Harris Jr. movements and life during the previous 3 decades. They had to know how he avoided being detected and what connections he might have had to the area he had once called home. After the identity of the suspect was made public, the case took a significant turn and now had a defined course. It reinforced the message that justice is persistent, no matter how long it takes, and it gave some hope to those who think the case may never be solved. Thanks to a DNA breakthrough, the name John Harris Jr. is now at the center of a long-standing cold case that is coming out of the shadows. Who is John Harris Jr.? His background is complicated and mysterious, much like the crime he is suspected of. He was born in 1966. Since the public still does not know the specifics of Harris's birth parents or early years, he appears to be a ghost in the story of his own purported crime. It is thought that Harris spent the majority of his life in San Joaquin County, California. However, little is known about his life outside of his neighborhood. By 2020, he had established himself as a resident of Arizona in the context of his career. In Manteca, Harris carved out a niche for himself working for a company that installed surveillance systems. An ironic detail considering his subsequent criminal accusations. Harris appears to be a man who has managed to live a private life based on the skin information available about him. It is known that Harris was not a very noticeable person. There were no obvious indicators of a difficult upbringing or difficult educational path that the general public is aware of. The abrupt connection to a violent crime is all the more startling given the lack of a known criminal past. Harris is the primary suspect in an attempted murder case, and his DNA has permanently linked him to a horrific deed, raising the possibility that beneath the surface of a normal life, there may be a history of darker tendencies. There have been no disclosed marriages or family relationships. In many ways, Harris appears to be a lone individual cut off from the social pillars that support most people's lives. His former community in San Joaquin County and beyond have surely felt the impact of his name becoming associated with the case. The close proximity of a man suspected of a dangerous crime is causing discomfort to neighbors who previously might have simply nodded to him passing. John Harris Jr. experienced an abrupt upheaval in his life at the age of 55. He was taken into custody on Wednesday, February 25, 2021. On suspicion of attempting murder, he was apprehended by the long arm of the law not far from his Manteca, California workplace. Not only was this arrest the consequence of diligent police work, but it also marked a significant advancement in DNA analysis. The arrest was made by local detectives in collaboration with district attorney investigators, according to San Mateo Police Chief E. Barberini. It took Matt Broad, an inspector with the district attorney's office, persistently reopening the case at the request of District Attorney Inspector Kevin Raffaelli, for there to be an immediate connection. At the time, Raffaelli was a San Mateo police surgeon who was heavily involved in the investigation of this especially unsettling case. The investigators' determination was unwavering in their pursuit of justice for the atrocious crime committed in 1989. Harris appeared to have lived the nomadic life in the Bay Area, having lived in the counties of San Mateo, Alameda, San Francisco, and San Joel, Queen. Despite this, he had remained unnoticed, as his DNA was not found in the National Law Enforcement Database. To establish a connection, the investigators had to pivot and use advanced genealogical methods similar to the one used to discover the identity of the infamous Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. In the end, it was his DNA that linked him to the case. Inspector Brolitz said that this scientific match would become the cornerstone of the case, unquestionably connecting Harris to the crime that had plagued the victims and the community for more than 3 decades. This statement summed up the results of tireless investigative efforts. As he considered the nature of the crime, Raffaelli noted how inhumane it was and how it left a lasting impression on the people who worked the case. At the time, Samatia was not used to handling crimes of that terrible caliber, and the local law enforcement had a collective memory of this specific incident. Steve Wagstaff, the district attorney, acknowledged the intricacy and skill of the investigation. Since Harris's DNA was missing from the databases that were usually checked, the investigating team had to use more creative ways to find the criminal. After being arrested, Harris was detained at the San Mateo County Jail with a hefty $500,000 bail. The community, which had previously been unaware of a seemingly ordinary man's dark past, was now confronted with the chilling reality of his alleged actions. For the victim and others impacted, this arrest represented a much-needed step toward justice and closure. On February 25, 2021, a gloomy Friday afternoon, John Harris Jr. appeared before the bench at San Mateo County Superior Court in Redwood City to answer to his charges. The seriousness of the situation was evident as he was about to be arraigning for 2 serious charges: attempted murder and aggravated mayhem, both of which carries a harsh life sentence. Given the gravity of the accusations, Justice Berberis handled the case with a calm disposition. Following Supreme Court Rule 23, the courtroom recognized that the rulings in this case would not establish a precedent. Therefore, the case's implications were limited to the present. When delivering the court's ruling, Justices Barberis, Vaughn, and McCaney presented a united front. John Harris Jr.'s attempt to review his conviction was unsuccessful due to the intricate legal proceedings. The court summarily dismissed his post-conviction petition in attempt to revoke his previous guilty plea for first-degree murder. This dismissal was not taken lightly following Harris Jr.'s appointment to the Appellate Council. The Office of the State Appellate Defender, or OSAD, submitted a withdrawal motion claiming that there was insufficient justification for the court's ruling to be incorrect. Harris Jr. was given the chance to reply, but he did not, so the court granted the motion and upheld the dismissal. The background to Harris Jr.'s current situation showed a complex legal battle. He had first accepted a guilty plea to first-degree murder in exchange for a shorter sentence of 25 years. But allegations of incompetent counsel and coercion emerged, and his guilty plea was temporarily withheld at a subsequent Krinkle hearing. The state's argument that they were unfairly excluded from the Krinkle hearing resulted in the guilty plea being reinstated. On appeal, Harris Jr. claimed that his constitutional rights were violated when the guilty plea was reinstated. The court denied the appeal, stating that the initial withdrawal was premature and that his plea was voluntary and informed upon review. Harris Jr.'s subsequent post-conviction petition was an attempt to work around these previous rulings. He asserted new arguments of collaboration between the trial court defense counsel and the prosecutor, but the court rejected them. The OSAD upheld the verdict. His actual innocence claim, which lacked new evidence or proof, was also rejected by the court. The petition was properly dismissed within the procedural boundaries, according to Justice Barberis, because it did not present any reasonably arguable issues. Finally, the court's decision was binding, the motion was granted, and the judgment was upheld. Harris Jr.'s attempt to obtain a new trial was ultimately unsuccessful due to the principle that once a case is decided, it cannot be pursued again. In a recent news conference, a San Mateo police chief, ITT Barberini expressed the victim's relief and gratitude in the John Harris Jr. case, which had gone unsolved for over 3 decades. The victim, who has been through the unimaginable for the past 32 years, now has some closure. The arrest of a suspect was made possible by the combined efforts of the San Mateo County District Attorneys and investigators, the FBI San Francisco and Los Angeles divisions, Manteca Police, and San Mateo Police detectives. It demonstrates their commitment and the power of collaborative law enforcement. Authorities have stated that there may be additional victims. They are currently processing additional DNA in order to uncover additional evidence to help with the ongoing investigation. Police in San Mateo are encouraging anyone with information about Harris to come forward. On the evening of December 23, 1998, a distress call was made to 911 in San Diego, prompting firefighters to rush to La Jolla Scenic Drive. The scene they encountered was nothing short of shocking. A car completely consumed by flames. As the smoke dissipated, a horrifying sight came into view. The charred remains of an individual in the passenger seat. The vehicle, which had Kansas license plates, was registered to a man named David Stevens, a 38-year-old resident of Pacific Beach, San Diego. This grim discovery marked the commencement of a perplexing case. The question arises, who exactly was David Stevens, and what events led to this tragic occurrence along one of San Diego's most picturesque routes? San Diego, California, renowned for its breathtaking beaches, parks, and year-round Mediterranean climate, is also notable for its strong ties to the United States Navy, as well as its prominence in the fields of healthcare and biotechnology. With a population exceeding 1.3 million residents, it stands as the 8th most populous city in the United States and the 2nd most populous in California. San Diego's rich history dating back to its establishment in 1769 and its diverse population contribute to a distinctive way of life that harmonizes recreational opportunities with a profound appreciation for its past. However, like any major city, San Diego faces its share of challenges, including crime. It is within this context that the cold case of David Allen Stevens, which had remained unsolved for years, was finally resolved in 2023. David Allen Stevens, born on October 23, 1960, in Osmond, Pierce County, Nebraska, led a life that remains somewhat shrouded in mystery, even after his untimely demise. While information about his father Gerald Lloyd Stevens is available, details regarding his mother and early years are scarce. Nevertheless, what is known paints a portrait of a man who held a significant position in the corporate world. He served as a marketing manager at Perfect Match, a dating service, a role that likely granted him unique insights into the intricacies of personal relationships. The irony of this is not lost, considering the enigmatic circumstances surrounding his own personal life and tragic end. On December 23, 1998, in San Diego, a sudden explosion disrupted the tranquility of an otherwise ordinary day. The loud boom, reminiscent of a gas explosion, prompted an immediate response from the San Diego Fire Department. Racing to La Jolla's Scenic Drive, firefighters were met with a vehicle engulfed in flames. As they battled the blaze, a journalist captured the intense scene, documenting the extinguishing of the fire. However, as the smoke cleared, a chilling discovery emerged. The charred remains of a human body were visible in the passenger seat, marking the beginning of a complex investigation. Further investigation revealed that the car's license plates were registered in Kansas and belonged to a 38-year-old man named David Stevens, who resided in Pacific Beach, San Diego. The mystery deepened as homicide detectives turned their attention to Stevens' apartment, searching for any clues that could shed light on the events leading up to his death. Inside the apartment, they stumbled upon intriguing signs that suggested he was not alone on his final night. In the bedroom's wastebasket, detectives found a discarded contraceptive wrapper and a tube of KOY jelly, indicating the presence of sexual activity. Additionally, 2 glasses on the nightstand, one bearing lipstick marks, hinted at the company of a woman. Strands of long, straight black hair, likely belonging to a female, were discovered in the bathroom. The bedroom itself provided even more intriguing clues. Investigator Joseph Cristenziani, one of the homicide investigators from the San Diego Police Department, observed 2 sets of fingerprints on the mirrored headboard of Stevens' bed. The size difference between the 2 sets suggested the involvement of both a man and a woman. The positioning and number of fingerprints indicated that an intimate encounter had recently taken place in the apartment. Armed with these discoveries, detectives began to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. Their focus shifted towards collecting physical evidence, particularly the smaller set of fingerprints and the black hairs, as they pointed towards the involvement of a woman. This crucial piece of evidence indicated that the woman may have been in the company of Stevens shortly before his unfortunate demise. As the investigation into the death of David Alan Stevens progressed, the police focused their efforts on identifying the mysterious woman who could be connected to his final moments. Their search led them to a nearby establishment called Dancers, a topless bar that Stevens was known to frequent. Detective John Teff, one of the investigators from the San Diego Police Department assigned to the case, visited the club and shared Stevens' pictures with the dancers and staff. Regrettably, none of the fingerprints obtained from the dancers matched those found in his bedroom, leaving the police without any solid leads regarding the woman's identity. In an attempt to uncover new information, Detective John R. Young, another dedicated detective from the San Diego Police Department, decided to explore a different approach. He delved into Stevens' personal belongings, specifically his address book. During Young's interview with her, the woman described her relationship with Stevens as casually friendly, hoping that this new lead would yield results. Her fingerprints were compared to those found in the apartment. Once again, there was no match. For months had passed since Stevens was tragically discovered in his car, and with no new leads or matches, the case gradually grew cold. For over 2 years, the mysterious death of David Alan Stevens remained dormant in the cold case files, with no significant breakthroughs or promising leads. Then, in a stroke of strategic thinking, the San Diego homicide detectives decided to capitalize on a major event, Super Bowl 35, which took place on January 28, 2001, featuring the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants. With a large television audience anticipated, the detectives saw an opportunity and ran a Crime Stopper spot during the game, displaying David Stevens' picture and appealing for public assistance. The following day marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. An anonymous female called in with potentially crucial information. The caller directed detectives towards a suspect, the same dancer who had previously asserted that she and David Stevens were merely friends, despite the fact that her DNA and fingerprints did not match the evidence at the crime scene. Detectives could not disregard this new lead. They believed it was more than a mere coincidence. Over the next 6 months, detectives tirelessly pursued the angle of the dance club, hoping to uncover solid evidence. Despite their diligent efforts, they continuously came up empty-handed, unable to definitively connect anyone to the crime. However, in November of 2001, the homicide team received another significant call. The caller was Nye Noren, a 21-year-old woman who claimed to possess vital information regarding David Stevens' murder. Noren disclosed that Stevens had been her supervisor and lover at Perfect Match. She held a crucial piece of information, the name of the man responsible for Stevens' death, Ronald Barker, who was 35 years old at the time of the murder. This revelation injected new life into the case, providing detectives with a solid lead to pursue. With this newfound information, the investigation gained momentum as detectives sought to unravel the connection between Nye Noren, Ronald Barker, and the tragic fate of David Alan Stevens. Ronald Barker, born in 1963, and Nye Noren, born in 1980, emerged as the central figures in the tragic case of David Alan Stevens. Barker's early life and family background remained largely unknown, concealed in the shadows of his later actions. On the other hand, Noren's life was marked by hardship from the very beginning. Born in a Thai refugee camp after her mother escaped the horrors in Cambodia, she arrived in the United States at the age of 5, initially settling in Florida before moving to San Diego. There, Noren's life was further tainted by domestic turmoil, as her stepfather's abusive behavior created a tense home environment. Noren worked as a telemarketer at Perfect Match, where she crossed paths with David Stevens. It was at that location where she also encountered Barker, whom she found through an online platform and entered into a passionate relationship with, despite him being a married 35-year-old man and her being only 18. While Noren's relationship with Stevens progressed from casual workplace flirting to planning their first date, her affair with Barker continued in the background. However, Noren became increasingly dissatisfied with Barker. On the same night that Stevens was killed, Noren had previously left his apartment at 3:00 a.m. when she returned home. She found Barker waiting for her in a jealous rage. In an attempt to conceal her infidelity, she falsely told Barker that her encounter with Stevens was non-consensual. Later, Noren confessed to the police that Barker, consumed by jealousy, shot and killed Stevens before setting his car on fire. She claimed to have been present during the murder but unable to stop Barker. Noren portrayed herself as another victim of Barker's anger, implicating him as the possessive boyfriend who carried out the murder. To support her account, Norn agreed to a police request to call Barker and discuss the incident while the conversation was recorded. This tactic aimed to move beyond a he said, she said situation, hoping to obtain an admission or any detail that could strengthen the case. The investigation uncovered a complex and intricate plot. Barker admitted to following Stevens, pretending that Norn's car had broken down. When Barker signaled with his lights, Norn deceived Stevens by claiming it was her brother coming to assist. Unaware of the impending danger, Stevens allowed Barker into the back seat of his car, where Barker shot him twice in the head. Barker confessed to setting the car on fire to eliminate evidence and even displayed burns he sustained during the act. For nearly 3 years, the two kept their atrocious crime hidden, bound by their shared secrecy. However, as the case unraveled, it became evident that both Barker and Norn were deeply entangled in a web of lies and deceit, ultimately leading to the tragic demise of David Allen Stevens. In November 2001, a significant turn of events unfolded when detectives apprehended Ronald Barker for first-degree murder. Shortly after, Norton was also arrested and faced the same charge. Barker's trial occurred in January 2003 in a San Diego courtroom, where he opted to represent himself. Despite his efforts to challenge the evidence, the jury swiftly found him guilty after just 2 hours of deliberation. Barker was sentenced to life in prison on January 27, 2003. Norton's trial followed a similar path, resulting in her conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence. However, Norton's case took a different turn as she appealed her conviction based on battered woman syndrome. This appeal led to a reduced sentence of 15 years, which began in 2003. Norton was released in 2017 after serving 14 years in prison, marking the conclusion of a complex chapter in San Diego's criminal justice system. The resolution of David Allen Stevens finally brought closure to this family, offering them a sense of finality and justice after enduring a long and challenging process. It was a dreary day on October 26, 1998, when a chilling discovery was made along the banks of the Columbia River. A body was discovered floating near Lower River Road in Vancouver, sending shockwaves through the local community. Authorities were quick to respond to the scene, hoping to uncover the identity of the unfortunate soul who had met their untimely demise. As they approached the body, they were hit with the pungent smell of decay, a telltale sign that the man had been in the water for a considerable amount of time. With no obvious clues as to who the man was, they carefully removed the body from the water and transported him out of the area to begin the arduous process of identification and autopsy. Little did they know that this was the start of a mystery that would continue to weigh on their minds for years to come. As the medical examiner's office began the process of an autopsy on the unidentified man's body, a chilling truth emerged. The autopsy revealed he had died from a gunshot wound to the head. But as investigators pored over the evidence, they were left with more questions than answers. Had the man taken his own life? Had someone else pulled the trigger? The truth remained shrouded in uncertainty. But that wasn't all. It was believed that the man had been in the water for anywhere from 6 months to a year, and this left authorities scrambling to piece together a timeline of events leading up to his tragic end. Despite the passage of time, the medical examiner's office was also able to estimate the man's age at the time of his death, putting him at around 53 years old. These findings only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Who was this man, and how had he met such a grisly end? The investigators faced a daunting challenge in their quest to uncover the truth behind the man's tragic end. They knew they had to first identify who he was, but it was a task easier said than done, for the man had been found with no means of identification, leaving authorities with no starting point. The investigators turned to the records of missing persons in the area, hoping to find a lead, but their search came up empty, leaving them with no idea who the remains could have belonged to. Desperate for answers, they cast a wider net, notifying agencies throughout the Northwest in the hopes that someone, somewhere, could identify the unknown victim. Despite their tireless efforts, however, their search proved fruitless. Another thing that could have helped investigators in uncovering the man's identity was fingerprints. However, the hope of this was dashed due to the advanced state of decomposition of the body. As days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to be hitting a brick wall. Frustration began to set in as the investigators were no closer to solving the mystery of the man's identity or his untimely demise. He remained an unknown John Doe, a haunting reminder of the many unanswered questions surrounding the case. Despite their best effort, the case gradually slipped into obscurity, Another mystery in a world full of them. The investigators had done all they could, but the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. The passage of time can sometimes be a double-edged sword when it comes to solving cold cases. While it may seem like hope fades with each passing year, the truth is that new technology and advancements in forensic science can breathe new life into a case once thought to be unsolvable. In 2008, the investigators working on the case decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. Armed with the latest forensic tools and techniques, they reached out to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, hoping that the advancements in DNA profiling would finally lead them to the answers they so desperately sought. The University of North Texas Center for Human Identification was able to develop a DNA profile of the unidentified male from samples taken during the autopsy. The DNA profile was a ray of hope for investigators, who wasted no time in submitting it to the National DNA Database, eagerly waiting for a match. But despite their best efforts, no match was found. The DNA profile had given them a new lead to follow, but it also reminded them of just how difficult it can be to solve a case with no definitive clues. Still, the investigators refused to give up hope. They knew that with each new development in the field of forensic science, the chance of finally unlocking the mystery of the man found in the river grew ever greater. After years of the unidentified man's case going cold, investigators were determined to finally uncover the truth. Around 2021, they decided to take a fresh approach and submitted a DNA sample from the remains to a renowned forensic DNA laboratory in Virginia, Bode Technology. With their expertise in extracting DNA from challenging samples, the scientists at Bode Technology eagerly took on the challenge. They knew that by analyzing the DNA sample, they could unlock the secrets to the identity of this mysterious John Doe. A forensic genealogist used DNA from the remains to trace the person's ancestry. Through meticulous research and comparison, the forensic genealogist discovered an ancestral link to a family from California. The lead was promising, and the genealogist pointed to one person in particular, the son of Chelsea Johnson Jr. and Ruth Marie Henson. Interestingly, this individual named Michael Johnson had no traceable activities since 1998. The investigators knew they had struck gold and were now one step closer to finally unraveling the identity of the mysterious John Doe. And so, as the autumn leaves fell in October 2022, Nikki Costa, the operations manager of the medical examiner's office, made a breakthrough in the case of the unidentified man. Nikki managed to track down Chelsea and Ruth Johnson's other children, Russell Johnson and Kathy Bergen, and they revealed some startling information. Apparently, their brother Michael had disappeared without a trace over 2 decades ago and had cut off all contact with the family. Could this be the missing link that investigators had been searching for all these years? Nikki was bent on solving the case of the unidentified man. She tirelessly pursued the lead that the DNA sample belonged to Michael. To confirm her suspicions, Nikki reached out to multiple agencies determined to find the missing piece of the puzzle. The California Department of Justice Missing Persons DNA program provided analysis of family reference samples, while the Wasatch County Sheriff's Office collected a DNA sample from Johnson's sister Kathy. Meanwhile, the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification sent its DNA profile, which was developed in 2008, to California's Missing Persons Program for comparison. With all the evidence gathered, Clark County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Martha Burt, finally concluded that the unidentified man was indeed Michael. Nikki's persistence and the collaborative efforts of multiple agencies had finally given the man a name and a chance at justice. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Michael's death remain a puzzle to investigators, who have yet to uncover any information about his activities leading up to the discovery of his body. Nevertheless, the discovery of his identity was a huge breakthrough in the case, giving investigators a starting point to unravel the mystery. Now authorities are reaching out to the public for help, hoping that someone might come forward with information that could shed light on what happened to Michael. Every little bit of information could make a difference, and authorities are eager to get to the bottom of this perplexing case. Kansas City is located in the western part of the state of Missouri. With a population of more than 500,000 people, it is the largest city in Missouri. One of the city's most iconic landmarks is the Kansas City Power and Light District, which offers an array of restaurants, shops, and entertainment venues. Visitors can also explore the city's vibrant art scene at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art and the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts. However, amidst all this beauty and excitement, it's hard to forget the shocking crime that once occurred in this very city. Back in the 1950s, in the wealthy Mission Hills neighborhood of Kansas City, A multimillionaire named Robert Greenlee Sr. had everything one could ever ask for. He was a car dealer who owned dealerships across the country. He had made his fortune by introducing General Motors vehicles to the Great Plains in the early 20th century. On February 3, 1947, at the age of 65, his life changed forever with the birth of his son, who he named Robert Bobby Cosgrove Greenlees Jr. Bobby's mother, Virginia Pollock, was Robert's second wife. The Greenlees family lived in luxury and were devoted to their beloved Bobby. He was not an only child, but he had an elder sister named Virginia who was born in 1941. He also had a half-brother named Paul who was born in 1917. Paul was Robert's son from his first marriage. In 1953, at the age of 6, Bobby was attending the prestigious Notre Dame de Sienne, a private Catholic school located at 3823 Locust Avenue in Kansas City. There he learned and grew with his peers. Everything was going fine and the future looked bright for Bobby. However, fate had other plans for the young boy and his family. The morning of September 28, 1953 was like any other day at Bobby's school, Notre Dame de Sienne. However, little did anyone know that this day would soon take a tragic turn. At around 11 a.m., Sister Moran, the nun on duty for the day, opened the school door and she was greeted by a plump woman, claiming to be Bobby's aunt. The woman explained that the boy's mother, Virginia, had suffered a heart attack while shopping at the County Club Plaza and had been rushed to St. Mary's Hospital. She went on to say that the Greenlees family had instructed her to take the child to his mother immediately. Without a second thought, Sister Moran went to retrieve Bobby from his classroom. The innocent 6-year-old, trusting of adults, had no reason to question the woman's identity or intentions. As he took the woman's hand, the nun watched as they both got into a cab and drove off. She assumed that everything was in order. Little did anyone know that the woman was not Bobby's aunt, and the events of that day would change the Greenlees families forever. The phone call that Virginia received less than an hour after Bobby was taken by the unknown woman was one that would forever haunt her. On the other end of the line was Sister Martha Anna, another nun from Bobby's school, who had called the family's home to inquire about Virginia's supposed heart attack. The nun was stunned to know that nothing of the sort had happened. Virginia was not in the hospital, and she had not had a heart attack. It soon dawned on both the nun and Virginia that something sinister was at play here, and it did not take them long to realize that Bobby had been kidnapped. After getting off the phone with Sister Martha, Virginia immediately contacted her husband, Robert, and explained to him everything that had happened. Robert was also as shocked and bewildered as his wife was. Without wasting time, he contacted the Kansas City Police Department to report the crime. The FBI was also called in to assist with the situation. Panic gripped the city as news of Bobby's kidnapping spread. The authorities launched a massive manhunt for the missing boy, but their efforts were hampered by the fact that they had no leads on the woman who had taken him. As the hours ticked by, hope began to fade. But then, on the same day that Bobby had been taken, his parents received the first of several ransom letters. The letter was signed by someone calling themselves M, and it demanded $600,000 for Bobby's safe return. The amount of money was staggering, equivalent to over $6 million in today's currency. But the demands didn't stop there. M also insisted that the ransom money be paid, and small denomination notes of 10s and 20s. The authorities were informed of the ransom letter, and they began working tirelessly to track down the mysterious M and secure Bobby's release. The following day, September 29, 1953, brought another ransom letter. This time, the letter came along with a pin that Bobby had been wearing on the day he was kidnapped. Robert, desperate to secure his son's release, decided to go gather the ransom money, and so he reached out to trusted friends and associates for help. One of them was Arthur Eisenhower, the executive vice president at Commerce Trust Company. He was also the brother of the President of the United States at that time. One thing Eisenhower did was to ensure that every bank clerk handling the ransom money made know of the serial numbers on all of the bills. These were later printed in newspapers around the country. The agonizing wait for Bobby's safe return seemed never-ending as his family continued to gather the exorbitant ransom demanded by the kidnapper. During this time, a man called the Greenlees residence multiple times to reassure Virginia that her son was alive. The kidnapper seemed to enjoy his twisted game, even as the family was plunged into despair. Over the course of a week, the family received a total of 6 ransom letters and 15 phone calls. They also agreed to comply with all the kidnappers. However, it would not be long before they realized that they had made a terrible mistake. By the evening of October 4, 1953, Robert had gathered the staggering sum of $600,000 in ransom money for the safe return of his son. The money was then placed in a duffel bag and taken to a bridge near Highway 40, just east of Kansas City. It was the largest ransom ever paid in American history at that time. Early the next morning, the kidnappers made contact with the Green Leases to confirm that they had retrieved the money and that Bobby would be returned within 24 hours. But as the day went on, there was still no word about the boy's whereabouts. The family waited anxiously for any news, but none came. The Green Leases were left to wonder if their son was alive or if they had been betrayed by the kidnappers. The suspense was unbearable, and it seemed like their worst fears were about to be realized. The next 24 hours would prove to be the most difficult and heartbreaking time in their lives. As the search for Bobby continued, an ex-con and cab driver named Joe Carr was about to play a crucial role in the investigation. He had been hired in the state of St. Louis by a man named Carl Austin Hall to be his personal chauffeur. From what Carr knew, Hall was new in town and was throwing money around like it was going out of style. Hall had rented an apartment, bought new clothes, and was living like a king. Carr was suspicious of Hall's behavior and decided to contact Joe Costello, his boss at the cab company. Costello was a man who had ties with the mob, and in addition to this, he also had connections within the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The sun had set on October 6, 1953, when Lieutenant Louis Shoulders and Patrolman Elmer Dolan received a tip from Costello about the man flaunting large amounts of money in St. Louis. They immediately rushed to the apartment where Hall was staying and apprehended him. Inside the room, the officers found 2 hefty metal suitcases filled to the brim with cash. It was an unbelievable sight. Hall was then escorted to the Newstead police station in North St. Louis, where the authorities interrogated him about the source of the money. At first, Hall was insistent they had done nothing wrong, but investigators soon began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. They suspected Hall was involved in the Greenlees kidnapping, given the amount of money he had on him. After some interrogation, Hall finally cracked and confessed to his role in the crime. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When asked about the whereabouts of Bobby, he revealed the boy was dead. Hall revealed they had not acted alone. He had a partner in crime, a woman named Bonnie Hetty. Together they had hatched the plan to kidnap Bobby and extort his wealthy parents for a hefty ransom. With Hall's confession and a thorough background check, investigators were able to piece together the timeline of events and uncover the shocking details of how the kidnapping occurred. It was a web of deceit and betrayal, with greed at the center of it all. Authorities found out that Hall came from a well-to-do family. He was the son of a lawyer. When his parents passed away, he inherited their 1,100-acre property in Pleasanton, Kansas, along with a substantial inheritance. However, Hall took a turn for the worse as he went on a downward spiral, wasting his fortune getting divorced and falling into addiction. His life hit rock bottom when he was sent to the Missouri State Penitentiary for robbing a cab driver of a mere $38. While in prison, Paul dreamed of one big score that would set him up for life, and that's when he remembered the wealthy Greenlees family. You see, years prior, Paul had attended a military reform academy with Bobby's older, adopted half-brother Paul, and that was when he had gotten to know about the family's wealth. In no time, Paul hatched a plan for a ransom payout. All that was left was to figure out just how to abduct the child. That's where Bonnie came into the picture. Bonnie was a woman of many contradictions. Despite being the beneficiary of a sizable inheritance from her father, she still indulged in prostitution and wild parties. She also seemed to have a thing for criminals. Her first husband was a bank robber who met his end in a hail of bullets from the police. But her second marriage didn't fare any better, and she ended up inheriting a house from the divorce settlement. It was in the bar of Hotel Robidoux, Missouri, that Bonnie crossed paths with Hall. Perhaps it was fate, or maybe just the universe aligning. But their chance meeting marked the beginning of a dark and twisted partnership. As the months passed, Hall gradually revealed his twisted scheme to Bonnie, and to his relief, she was all too eager to participate. And so, in the summer of 1953, Hall and Bonnie began trailing the Greenlees family, like two hungry wolves, stalking their prey. They watched as the family went about their daily routines, hoping to find a weak spot to exploit. At first, they planned to snatch the Greenlees' daughter, Sue, but they soon realized that Bobby, the 6-year-old son, would be an easier target. They knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to make the big score. And with this, the stage was set for the kidnapping that shook the nation to its core. Bonnie had been the one that pretended to be Bobby's aunt and picked him up from school without raising any alarms. Following this, Bonnie and Bobby were then dropped off at a drugstore where Hull was waiting. Hall took control of the situation, driving them across state lines to a vacant field in Overland Park, Kansas. Bonnie got out of the car and walked a short distance, leaving Bobby alone with Hall, who had no intention of keeping him alive. At first, Paul tried to take Bobby's life by using a piece of rope, but the rope was too short. Frustrated and angry, Hall punched Bobby in the face, knocking out one of his teeth. Bobby fell to the car's floor, and that's when Hall pulled out his .38 caliber pistol and shot him at point-blank range. Bobby did not survive for more than 30 minutes after he was abducted. After carrying out the evil deed, both Hall and Bonnie knew they had to get rid of the evidence. They drove to Bonnie's home in St. Joseph, Missouri, with Bobby's lifeless body wrapped in a plastic bag. They then carefully placed the bag in a pre-dug grave in the backyard. To conceal the stench of the dead body, they dumped a large amount of lime onto the bag. Hall then planted chrysanthemums over the grave, hoping to disguise it as a flower garden. Now, when Hall and Bonnie got their hands on the ransom money, they wasted no time in escaping across the state to St. Louis. Their Hall had purchased a pair of metal suitcases to stash the money. He and Bonnie also found an apartment on Arsenal Street, with the view of Tower Grove Park, and there they celebrated their newfound fortune by drinking their hearts out. As the night wore on, Bonnie's drunkenness began to get the better of her, and she dozed off. This was the perfect opportunity for Hall to put another plan he had into action. In the middle of the night, he put $2,000 in Bonnie's purse and slipped out of the apartment with the rest of the loot. Hall then took a cab to the Coral Court Motel in Marlboro, Missouri, and along the way, he picked up a prostitute named Sandra O'Day. He planned to use Sandra's help to divert the police's attention. Before his arrest, Hall arranged for her to fly to Los Angeles and mail a letter he had written to the Greenlees family. Doing this would have thrown the police off his trail. There are rumors that Sandra had also at some point caught sight of the ransom money Paul had been carrying about, and she had been the one that reported it to the police. It is however not clear if there is any truth in this. Hall is also believed to have bought 2 garbage cans and a shovel. He then drove a rental car to a spot along the Merrimack River in St. Louis County to hide the ransom money. But unfortunately for Hall, he didn't find a suitable spot to bury the cans, and so he kept the money with him. It wasn't long after this that he was arrested. After all these revelations got out in the open, police sprang into action. Bonnie was tracked down and arrested in the apartment Hall had left her in. Both of them were indicted for capital murder and kidnapping, facing the full force of the law for their crime. On October 7, 1953, Bobby's remains were discovered where they had been buried. 2 days later, on October 9th, a solemn funeral was held at St. Agnes Catholic Church, where loved ones and community members gathered to mourn the tragic loss of this innocent boy. Bobby was laid to rest with tears and heavy hearts, forever remembered as a victim of one of the most heinous crimes in American history. As for the 2 kidnappers, justice was swift for them. Because the crime had crossed state lines, the case became a federal one. And on October 30th, 1953, Paul and Bonnie appeared in a court and pleaded guilty to the charges against them. The jury took just an hour and 8 minutes to deliberate before recommending a death sentence. Less than a month later, on November 19th, 1953, both Hall and Bonnie accepted their fates and made no attempt to appeal the verdict. They were executed together in the Missouri gas chamber on December 18th, 1953, a mere 81 days after the kidnapping. At the time of their death, Bonnie was 41, while Hall was 34 years old. The aftermath of Bobby's kidnapping and murder was not without its twists and turns. Hall and Bonnie's execution may have brought closure to the Greenlees family, but it also brought to light a startling revelation. Now, when Hall was arrested, only half the ransom money was recovered. A total of $312,000 was unaccounted for. It was believed that Lieutenant Shoulders and Patrolman Dolan, the officers who arrested Hall, had stolen the missing money. However, they initially denied this, claiming that they had brought all the money with them to the police station. Eventually, they were federally indicted and convicted of perjury. On April 15, 1954, Shoulders was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Dolan, on the other hand, received a 2-year prison sentence. But this story didn't end there. In a shocking turn of events, Shoulders died in 1962. Once this happened, Dolan revealed to the FBI that Shoulders and Joe Costello, the mob boss, had actually stolen half of the ransom money. Dolan had been too scared to speak up earlier for fear of retribution, and it wasn't until Shoulders and Costello had passed away that he finally revealed the truth. For his cooperation, Dolan received a pardon from President Lyndon B. Johnson in July 1965. With this, Bobby's tragic tale came to an end. As we reflect on the tragic events that occurred in 1953, we are reminded that justice was ultimately served for Bobby, but at a great cost. We must continue to ask ourselves, how can we prevent such tragedies from happening again? So what lessons can we learn from Bobby's case? And how can we use this knowledge to build a safer and more just society for all? The case of Keely Bunker. What happens when a trusted friend who is meant to keep you safe turns out to be the very monster you should flee from? In the case of Keely, she discovered the dark and unsettling truth behind her friend's seemingly innocent smiles. But unfortunately, it was too late. This is the heart-wrenching story of Keely Bunker. We extend our heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Keely, who will forever cherish her memory. Before the 19th of September 2019, Keely was full of life. Born on the 7th of September 1999, Keely was both a blessing to her parents and a role model to her siblings. Her mother described her as a precious and beautiful daughter, while her sister described her as one of the most vibrant, caring, and beautiful souls this earth has ever seen. She was a go-getter who had worked her way through the hurdles of life to get a degree and become a teacher. On the day she met her tragic fate, she was to go in for an interview to become an assistant teacher. But that promising life was cut short by her childhood friend, Wesley Street. Wesley and Keely had known each other since they were in infant school. Although they might not have been best of friends, they were quite close because they maintained their friendship through the years. It was for this reason Keely invited him to her 20th birthday celebration after the musician's concert at the O2 on September 18, 2019. Keely was very excited about that day. On the day of the concert, Keely and her best friend Monique Riggin met Wesley at the New Street station in Birmingham. After the concert, the trio went to a nightclub where they partied until 2:40 a.m. Then they got a taxi back to Tamworth, where they stayed. Keely's house was a walking distance from where they alighted, and Monique had asked her to stay the night due to concerns about her safety. But Keely didn't want to miss the job interview she had fixed the next day, and said, "I've got Wes. He'll walk me back. It'll be fine." That was the last time Monique saw her. The next day, Keely didn't get to the interview, and friends and family tried to contact her. By 5:30 p.m. that day, her father filed a missing persons report. After reaching out to friends, the police discovered Wesley was the last person to see her, and he was immediately brought in for questioning. The 20-year-old man claimed to have parted ways with Keely when they reached a telephone box close to his home, leaving her to walk the rest of the path alone. As part of the investigation, the police officers told him to take them to the exact location, and he pointed it out. He even showed the officers the exact route they had walked to that very spot, and they couldn't be more grateful for his help, so they let him go. But at 9 p.m., her uncle, Jason Brown, who was part of the search party, discovered Keely's body submerged in a pond in Wigington Park in Tamworth. Her clothes had been taken off, and there were marks on her neck indicating that she had been strangled to death. It was a horrifying sight. Wesley immediately became the first suspect. The police arrested Wesley, and the interrogation began. He stuck to the fact that he had left Keely alive at the telephone box. But when they went through his mobile phone, his GPS showed that he went to the location of the murder 7 times that day. And when he tried to argue his innocence, the CCTV footage showed him and Keely by Tamworth Rugby Club later than the time he claimed to have left her. His bank card and jacket were found in the park, and the post-mortem examination of Keely revealed Street's DNA. With this evidence, he was charged with the sexual assault and murder of Keely. Initially, during the trial, Wesley kept arguing his innocence. He mentioned that he was so drunk he messed up the description of how the night went. He promised that he had left her happy, and she seemed happy. However, later into the trial, he claimed to have accidentally killed her during consensual sex in the park. He said Keely had flirted and teased him as they walked home, and in the end, they had found themselves in the park. But you should note that before that confession, he claimed that they were childhood friends who had never entertained any ideas of romance. So it was clear that he kept changing his statements to go in line with the evidence that was being presented. Wesley went on to describe how his GPS location showed him returning to the murder spot several times that day. He said that after accidentally murdering her during a moment of passion, he dumped the body in the pond and kept returning to the location to cover Keely with branches. When he was asked why he didn't tell the truth when he was asked by the police and Keely's relatives before the body was discovered, he said, "I didn't know how to act and explain to other people how she died, because I felt embarrassed in myself and very scared to explain to the police, everyone, my mom and dad." However, the evidence presented by the prosecution showed otherwise. On their walk home, Wesley had persuaded Keely to go towards the rugby club close to the park on the pretext of going for a smoke. On getting to the park, he had forced himself on her and held her in a choke hold while she was fighting for freedom. His claims that he killed her in a moment of passion couldn't have been possible because it would take more than a few seconds for her to die. Then, when she died, he took her to the pond, covered her up with branches, and went home. The evidence presented before the jurors was already enough to find him guilty. But before the sentencing date, more chilling evidence about Wesley's horrible nature came to light. Due to the severity of the case, media outlets were quick to post details about the trial. This unknowingly triggered a reaction from women who had been previous victims of Wesley. In the court, Wesley portrayed himself as a young man who had made innocent mistakes. His father also testified that he was autistic and needed help understanding the proceedings of the trial. However, 3 women who had been victims of his sexual assault came forward to completely refute any claim of his innocence. In the year 2015, he sexually assaulted a 16-year-old girl. In 2017, his victim was a 15-year-old girl. And just a few months before Keely's death, his victim was another 20-year-old. Although investigations show there was a possibility there were more victims, those 3 were the only ones courageous enough to step forward. One of them told the court that she thought she was never going to get over it, but she had fought the sickening thoughts that almost overwhelmed her. Another said she was really scared to tell anyone because of how ashamed she felt. But after hearing about Keely's case, she just couldn't remain quiet. The third survivor shared how she blamed herself for the incident because she had gone to his house. Hannah Swee, the lead prosecutor, described Wesley's offense as a pattern of offending. She described Wesley as a man who tried to get what he wanted without having any regard for the consequences. She also mentioned that his innocent look and friendly character made his victims less wary of him. Reports show that his victims were either friends or acquaintances. It's easy to have a stereotypical image of a perpetrator, but what we often do not think about is a young lad who is popular, who has many friends, who is well known and liked, said Detective Inspector Cheryl Hannon, the senior investigating officer on the case. She also described Wesley as a devious and manipulating character, noting his arrogance in playing the martyr. He acted as if people were blaming him unfairly when he knew full well where she was and what he'd done, and the efforts he'd gone to concealing it to delay people finding her. His friend trusted him to walk her home that night, and it's only Wesley to blame that she didn't make it home. He was trusted to walk her home, but he manipulated the situation, preyed upon her, and ultimately raped and murdered her. He then went on to put himself at the center of the investigation, lying to the police, her family, and her friends that she was safe and well, changing his lies as the evidence was presented to him. Wesley was sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole. During the sentencing, the judge described how Wesley had cut the beautiful life of Keely short just to satisfy his desires. She lost the opportunity of fulfilling her life ambition of helping to educate young children, and her family had lost the company of their beloved daughter, sister, and niece. Keely's relatives also shared how they would never completely heal enough to forgive Wesley. Her mother, Debbie, said that as Keely's family, the outcome of this trial will never be enough in terms of justice. Keely was the kindest, most caring, and innocent young lady, and she was only just starting out in her life. Such is the hell they feel, they are incapable of showing any forgiveness. The horrible fate of Keely is a reminder that we can never truly tell who a person is. Everyone should always take precautions when they're out so late, because a person who you might deem your protector might actually be the predator. Carla Lowe was born December 10, 1961, and was described by her sister as a good and generous person. In 1983, 21-year-old Carla was living in Pompano Beach. Tragically, on November 13, 1983, she was found deceased in Delray Beach, Florida, near a train station just north of Atlantic Avenue. She had been beaten while waiting for an Amtrak train. Detectives said they searched the area for hours but never found anyone who had seen or heard anything suspicious. Without any further leads, the case would go cold. Then, in 2021, Detective Todd Clancy worked on the case with former detectives from the department and utilized new technology. They were then able to find the suspect. Using new fingerprint technology from UK-based Foster and Freeman Company, it allowed a fingerprint to be identified from a piece of evidence left at the scene. However, police would not name the piece of evidence, saying the case was still under investigation. The device used to crack the case is known as Recover, and it is able to develop fingerprints on difficult surfaces and even from items that have been cleaned to prevent identification. 38 years after her life was cut short, 59-year-old Ralph Williams was arrested for her murder in Jacksonville, Florida on November 30th, 2021. He had been a person of interest in the killing for quite some time and was actually arrested the day of her murder on grand theft auto and burglary charges, but could not be connected by evidence to her death. Williams' criminal record shows more than 20 arrests across Florida on charges like burglary, resisting an officer with violence, and robbery with a gun or deadly weapon, among others. Police have not determined a motive yet, but say that some of her belongings were taken, and there is no connection between Williams and Carla, and he remains behind bars at the Duval County Jail and will be extradited to Palm Beach County where the murder occurred.